The Weight of Stars. A story of silence, sacrifice, and salutes. The rehearsal dinner was held at my mother's favourite restaurant, the kind of place with linen napkins and candles that dripped wax onto silver holders. My sister Camille had chosen it specifically because it photographed well. Everything about Camille's wedding had been chosen because it photographed well. I arrived late. I always arrived late to family events now, not out of disrespect, but because the drive from the base took longer than anyone accounted for, and because I had learned, slowly, painfully, that my presence at family gatherings tended to shift the atmosphere in ways that made everyone uncomfortable, including me. I was still in uniform. I hadn't had time to change. The maitre d' held the door. I nodded and walked through. The dining room was already warm with candlelight and conversation. I spotted my mother at the centre table, holding court in the way she always had, chin lifted, wine glass tilted at that practiced angle, laughing at something the man beside her had said. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit that couldn't quite disguise the military bearing underneath it. Square jaw, careful eyes that moved across the room the way trained eyes always do, not anxious, just aware. That had to be Marcus Webb, Navy SEAL captain, Camille's groom. I made my way through the tables. A few relatives glanced up. My Aunt Patricia did a small double take. She always forgot, or pretended to forget, what I actually did with my life. My cousin Derek raised his glass in a half salute that was meant to be a joke. I smiled at him because I knew he meant well. My mother saw me when I was still 15 feet away. The shift in her expression was subtle, but I had been reading that face for 41 years. The slight tightening around the eyes, the way her smile stayed in place but moved from genuine to performed in the space of a breath. "Jennifer," she said, "you're late." "Traffic on the 95, I said. "Hello, Mom." She turned to the man beside her before I had even reached the table. "Marcus," she said, with the warm, conspiratorial tone she reserved for people she was trying to impress, "this is my other daughter, Jennifer Daniel." A pause that lasted exactly 1 beat too long. My disappointment. She laughed when she said it. The table laughed with her, not cruelly, the way laughter sometimes is, but in that uncomfortable way people laugh when they're not sure if something is a joke, but the host is already moving past it, and it seems safest to follow along. I stood still. Marcus Webb turned from my mother and extended his hand to me. His face was polite, composed, the face of a man who had learned to navigate awkward social moments with professional grace. "Captain Marcus Webb," he said, "Camille's told me a lot about you." "Jennifer Daniel," I said and shook his hand. That was the moment it happened. He looked at my face, really looked, the way people rarely do at a first meeting, past the smile and the social performance and into the actual features, and something in his expression changed. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies with a sharp intake of breath and a stumble backward. It was more controlled than that because he was a controlled man. But his eyes went wide by a fraction, and then went still in that very particular way that eyes go still, when the mind behind them is rapidly processing something unexpected. He released my hand, took one precise step back, and saluted. Not a casual acknowledgement, a full, formal, rigid military salute, right hand raised, fingers straight, eyes forward. "Admiral Kent," he said, "Ma'am." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had heard since a briefing room in Bahrain 4 years ago, when we lost communication with 3 operatives in the field. My mother's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Aunt Patricia made a sound like a small animal. Derek's raised glass stayed raised. Camille, at the far end of the table, had turned at the sound of her fiancé's voice and was staring with an expression that was equal parts confusion and something that looked like the beginning of understanding. I held Marcus Webb's salute for exactly the appropriate length of time. Then I said quietly, "At ease, Captain." He lowered his hand. His bearing remained exactly as it had been. If he was embarrassed, he gave no sign of it. That, I thought, was what 20 years of SEAL training actually brought you, not just physical endurance, but the ability to stand completely still inside a moment that had exploded. My mother set her wine glass down. "Jennifer," she said, and then nothing else, because there was nothing else. The language she had always used with me, the diminishments, the gentle redirections, the jokes at my expense that she had convinced herself were affectionate, had suddenly, in the space of one salute, become something she could see from the outside, something that no longer fit the shape of the room. I pulled out the empty chair beside Camille and sat down. "Hi Cam," I said, "you look beautiful." My sister looked at me for a long moment, then she reached across the table and took my hand. "Jen," she said, "why didn't you ever tell us?" It was the question I had been waiting for someone to ask for 16 years. The answer was complicated, and I didn't give all of it that night. Some of it I never gave, because some things that happen in service to your country are not yours to give. They belong to the operations reports filed in rooms without windows, to the men and women who stood beside you in the dark, to the families who received folded flags instead of phone calls. But I gave Camille some of it. Later, when the dinner had wound down and the relatives had drifted toward the bar or the parking lot, when Marcus Webb had excused himself with the tact of a man who understood exactly when a family needed room, I sat with my sister on the restaurant's small outdoor terrace, and I gave her what I could. I told her about Annapolis, how I had graduated third in my class, and said nothing about it because our mother had already decided, before I started, that I would not amount to much academically, and I had found that it was easier to let her believe what she believed than to spend energy correcting her. I told her about the first deployment. The Persian Gulf, a frigate called the USS Harmon, a commanding officer named Admiral Patricia Reeves, who had looked at 26-year-old Lieutenant Commander Jennifer Daniel, and told her that the Navy had too few women who understood that authority was not something you demanded, but something you built, one decision at a time. I told her about the years after that, the operations I could reference only obliquely, the promotions that came because the work demanded them, not because I had campaigned for them. The rank of Rear Admiral, achieved at 40, younger than most, a fact that had appeared in a military journal that my mother had never read. "Why didn't you tell her?" Camille asked. "Mom, why didn't you tell her any of it?" I looked out at the parking lot. Somewhere in it, Marcus Webb was probably standing beside a car, giving us space, checking his phone with the disciplined patience of a man accustomed to waiting for the right moment to move. "Because," I said, "I was afraid." Camille stared at me. "You're an admiral, Jen." "I know. You command." "I know what I command." I turned to look at her, and I was still afraid of her, of that look she gets, of being 14 years old again and watching her face when I brought home a report card and the only thing she could see was the 1B in the row of A's. I stopped. Fear doesn't care about rank, Cam, it just knows the old paths. My sister was quiet for a moment, then she said, "She's proud of you, she just doesn't know how." "I know," I said, "I know that too." Marcus Webb knocked on the terrace door at 10:30. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. He looked at me with the direct, uncomplicated respect of one officer regarding another. "Admiral, I wanted to say I recognized you from the briefing materials. Joint Task Force 2019. You made a call that saved 11 of my men. I didn't know you were Camille's sister until tonight." I stood. We were eye to eye, Marcus Webb and I, which was unusual. He was 6 feet 2 and I had an inch on him in heels. "Your men performed exceptionally," I said, "under impossible conditions." "They had good intelligence and a clear order," he said. "That was you." We looked at each other in the way that people look at each other, when they share a knowledge that cannot be translated into dinner conversation. "Take care of my sister," I said. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and he meant it. My mother found me in the coat check line at 11. She was not a woman who apologized easily. She had been raised in a tradition that treated public acknowledgement of error as a form of weakness, and she had passed that tradition to both her daughters in different ways, Camille in her tendency to deflect conflict, me in my tendency to absorb it in silence. We were both, in different ways, her daughters. She stood beside me and did not speak for a moment. Then she said, "Admiral." Just that word, testing it, turning it over. "Mom," I said. "When did it happen, the promotion?" 5 years ago. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't." "I should have," she stopped, started again. "You should have told me." "Yes," I said, "I should have." We collected our coats. The coat check attendant, young, barely 20, watched us with the polite non-expression of someone professionally trained to witness the private moments of strangers. Outside, the night was cold and clear, the kind of cold that makes the stars sharp. My mother looked up at them for a moment. Then she looked at me, at the uniform, the ribbons, the insignia that told a story she had never thought to read. "My daughter, the Admiral," she said. It wasn't an apology. My mother did not do apologies, but it was something. It was the first sentence she had ever spoken about my career without a qualification attached to it. No but, no although, no sliding redirect toward what she had hoped I would be instead. Just my daughter, the Admiral. I buttoned my coat against the cold. "Get some sleep, Mom," I said. "Big day tomorrow." She reached out and touched my arm, once briefly, the way she had when I was small and she was tucking me in and the world between us was still uncomplicated. Then she turned and walked toward her car. Marcus Webb and Camille were married the next afternoon in a garden ceremony with white chairs and too many flowers and a string quartet that played something classical I couldn't name. Marcus wore his dress whites. I wore mine. When the SEAL captain and my sister stood facing each other at the altar, and the officiant asked who gave this woman, my mother said, "Her family does." She glanced at me when she said it. I held her gaze. And for the first time in a very long time, I did not look away first. After the reception, when the dancing had started and the cake had been cut, and Camille had thrown her bouquet into a crowd of laughing cousins, I stood alone for a moment at the edge of the garden. Marcus found me there. He stood beside me in his dress whites, watching the lights strung between the trees move slightly in the warm night wind. "Hell of a family," he said. "You have no idea," I said. He smiled, the real smile, not the polished one. "Actually," he said, "I think I'm starting to." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two officers who had learned that silence was not emptiness, but a kind of language all its own. Then I raised my glass. "Welcome to the family, Captain," I said. Marcus Webb raised his. "Thank you, Admiral," he said. "It's an honor." Above us, the stars were very bright and very far away, and the night held all its old, complicated weight, and I stood inside it, Jennifer Daniel, Admiral, daughter, sister, woman, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt entirely and completely myself. The weight of stars, my first commanding officer once told me, is not their brightness. It is their patience. They burn for 1,000 years before anyone looks up and sees them. She was right about most things.